A recent study by Atlassian tells us that 96% of people have missed a mandatory meeting and 89% of people find meetings ineffective or poorly managed. Perhaps an AI-powered virtual assistant could help us with these issues.
We're going to discuss this further in this episode of Intelligent Tech. We're joined today by Jonathan MacDonald, an investor, entrepreneur, and thought leader who recently founded Self, a hyper-personal, AI-powered personal assistant. Jonathan, thank you for joining us today.
Jonathan, what gets you up in the morning? We're really interested to understand what makes you tick.
I think most of my life has been trying to work out how technology can be more human and how humans can use technology more productively. So that's my main motivation, and it's been since I was about 5, since the late 70s. Believe it or not, I've always been fascinated by how these machines can be more useful, and unfortunately over the decades they seem to be more about humans being the batteries as opposed to humans being the masters. And so yeah, that's what makes me motivated on a daily basis.
Fantastic. And Jonathan, can you tell us what your first experience of AI was and what your reaction to it was?
Well, I've been in the tech industry since the late 70s, early 80s. I was a kid, and my dad was a scientist, and an engineer, so was very geeky. So I was surrounded by computers, and the kind of move toward artificial intelligence didn't happen overnight. The machine learning algorithms have been around for a long time. So the way of kind of enabling something to quote unquote make decisions is a multi-decade maturation. And so my experience of that maturation over these 30, 40 years has been one of a gradual realization and observation of various different market moves that happen in terms of, a new player comes along, has a quote unquote brand new AI offering or a new machine learning or a new algorithm offering, or whether it's the Amazon shopping experience or the McDonald's drive-through pret-a-manger backend. All of these things have been over time new, and so if you're as old as I am, you become less fazed by the new announcements, and you see it more as a long trajectory of how things kind of end up being. And this current AI world is the natural conclusion of the last 30 years of technology, and I think now we have a choice as to what the next 30 years looks like, which is one of the things that I'm working on.
Fantastic. And Jonathan, I use a lot of different applications in my life, whether at work or in my personal life. Can you tell us a bit about Self and how it perhaps might kind of replace the need to use or work with some of those applications to ensure someone is perhaps living more efficiently?
Well, I think the starting point is that there is a choice. There's a red pill, blue pill choice in technology, and one is that we are using tools that essentially we're feeding full of our data and private information, and the other is that we have sovereignty over that. And the entire tech industry is geared towards the first version, and there is a giant option for the second version, and that's what Self is. So Self is an assistant that learns about you and your own individual information that resides on your own Self server that is under your control, and no one else has access to it. There's no advertisers that are using it, and there's no giant large language model of everyone else's private conversations. It's completely yours, and then can act like a personal assistant to you to solve tasks in the background, help you plan, organize, buy things. At the moment, with the people using Self in the beta that we're in at the moment, there's people using it for trip planning, for doing creating a reading list of certain books in a particular genre. There's someone who wanted to find a particular type of Mercedes and ended up finding it for $18,000 less than anywhere else online, and so the user used Self to buy the Mercedes for $100,000. You have other people who use Self to only for restaurant recommendations, and others that have renamed their Self Jarvis or Alfred, and then they go to restaurants that Self has found for them, and then send Self a selfie of them in the restaurant. And I mean, what's really weird is that everyone who uses Self stops using Google search. 80% of the people who use Self use it every single day, 5 or 6 times a day. And once you use it once, you tend not to reverse, because Self immediately is learning you from the first moment you interact with Self. And so after 2, 3 days, 4 days, there's hundreds of data points that can be useful for you with your own assistant working for you. And imagine ChatGPT that was connected to the entire internet, which ChatGPT isn't, connected to the entire internet and is only using your own personal filters for every single line of content that comes back. It's actually geared towards exactly your preferences. That's what Self is. And so, yeah, it's very popular amongst the people that we're drip feeding in at the moment. We've got thousands and thousands on the waiting list. Anyone can go to self.app and join up. It's free in this testing period.
Amazing. It sounds like a fantastic piece of tech that you've developed there, Jonathan. Are we right in thinking that humans actually check the AI on the Self application? How does that work?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been disturbed by is the hallucinations of the standard AI platforms. And one of the reasons why those hallucinations exist is that the idea is to remove humans from computer thought. And I find that abhorrent for a number of reasons, ethical and otherwise. But the primary issue with that is that the AI can start validating what it thinks is accurate, even though it blatantly isn't. And then it will validate that again and again and again. And it turns out that, that is now the truth. And what we do is that we have actual personal assistants, like real world, real life human personal assistants, each assigned to each person's self. That human assistant can't actually see who that person is. They can just see how the Self algorithm is responding and whether or not the preferences are in tune with the response. And there's a whole bunch of tech behind the scenes that can show the relative level of accuracy, but we're teaching this juvenile AI, which is yourself, with very adult, non-juvenile personal assistants in the real world, to help Self learn what being caring looks like and being useful looks like. And this, of course, is completely not even in this taxonomy of large tech. No one talks about care and real utility. They talk about how many eyeballs will feed how many adverts, and so I think that's not the way it's not the biggest opportunity. I think caring and emotional intelligence rather than logical intelligence is the future of AI.
Absolutely.
And so, Jonathan, without those humans there in the loop, do you think this personal assistant, it wouldn't really fulfill its role of being, a personal assistant and offering you a personalized service? And without them, it would really be quite similar to a lot of the tech that already exists, and perhaps, features some of these hallucinations and whatnot that we're seeing now with some AI chatbots that exist. And so that's its point of difference?
The point of difference is that it's your personal AI that is only tuned to your preferences. Right. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the including humans in the training is unique as well. But when there are certain users in a certain group who've been in for now 4 months in trials, and they're only 10% human checked, moderated. 90% is done by Self, and and is 100% accurate. So in terms of the users' feedback, they genuinely have now, they've never known whether they're talking to a human modified AI or just a pure AI. They have no idea. And in fact, they all now feel as if self is actually a friend. So we've actually kind of gone past the Turing test moment. And you know, we also, it should be worth mentioning that when we start commercializing this next year, people will have an option to actually have their own personal human at the other end of this. So
Right.
the paradox of it all, if you like, is that the premium version is to actually have a human personal assistant, which, by the way, I must admit, is something that I've been ideologically thinking about for years, because I think that in a world of automated, digital, artificial, virtual, mixed, augmented reality, humans aren't just something that should be bypassed and pushed aside and disintermediated. I think humans are the premium product. I think artisanship is the premium. And I think humans are way more special and needed in a world full of digital brilliance.
Great. And I'm interested too about whether it could help vulnerable people or people with, you know, certain types of disabilities and whatnot. Can it play a really personalized role in their life and help them?
Yeah, so we're going into the time of recording is coming in September 23, which is Alzheimer's Awareness Month, and so self is extremely useful in all manner of dementia-related diseases and and various levels of ability. And one of the reasons why self is so extremely useful for that is because understanding each individual's personal needs and preferences is the first part of caring. If we want technology to be useful and to care for people, the baseline is hyper-personalization. Like the starting point, the first bullet point is understand each individual person to a unique level that is completely able to tune their experience. That's you know, that in our mandate, that's kind of like the first tick box, and it's something that the large AI platforms will never arrive at. So in terms of the mental challenges such as dementia through to any other forms of negative impacts that people may be suffering from and then managing through, and the people in their lives that are also affected by it, it's useful to have a machine that has been human trained and also human tuned to you, that never forgets and always can organize and can act as a companion and a reminder. And it's very personal to my heart. I mean, I have dementia in the family and my mother's side, but I feel that the least we can do with all this wonderful technology is to make it more useful. I think we're duty bound to do that.
And what's your vision for the future and your vision for self going forward?
Well, self is actually a kind of a Trojan horse in terms of the assistant that it is. You'd think that that's the whole game, but it's not really. Self will very rapidly grow into being a browser as well, and that browser, which is just your browser but connected to everything, more importantly filtered through your personal preferences. Bearing in mind that self stands for system effective lifestyle filtering.
Yeah.
The browser then will turn into applications, and the applications will be inside an ecosystem of an operating system, which is yourself. And so the overall ambition is for self to take over what I believed the Apples and Androids of the world were going to get to with OS, but they didn't, because that's not what they believe is useful. I see that self should be your own personal operating system, and whilst I have breath in my body, we'll achieve that.
Right. Well, Jonathan, I really feel like I need a virtual personal assistant in my life. I'm a little bit worried that I might fall in love with my virtual personal assistant or something, though. I suppose there's a number of ethical considerations and whatnot that goes into creating such a personalized business model and service for people, perhaps. And a whole lot of things that I suppose could go wrong if there isn't a really kind of well thought out governance structure around what you're creating. Are you deeply considering these like sort of important questions, governance considerations, and policies and whatnot in what you're creating?
Yeah, I mean, listen, 6 books ago of mine, I wrote about what has now become the GDPR data protection legislations. I'm knee deep in it. Of the thousands of keynotes I've given, and the bunches of TED talks, and the and the workshops around the world, and the hundreds of companies at the highest level I've advised, and the governments I've helped, and even the stuff with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, I'm knee deep in this stuff anyway. So I have been a campaigner and a creator of the guidelines for years and years and years and years and years. So yeah, it's not a I'm concerned when some tech startups with large AI platforms have been in business for a few years after leaving college with a physics degree, and then proffer some form of ethical responsibility. No. So the truth is that if you are to truly answer to the ethical concerns, it's an architectural choice at the beginning. And the beginning is how you structure who owns what, who controls what, where's what is stored. And if you boil down all privacy and ethics in digital life, it is down to usage and control and rights. And I'm a fan of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. I'm a fan of the first clause of that. I'm a fan of the people being born free, but also free to choose. And I'm not a fan of the fact that when a service is free, you're the product. I'm not a fan of the fact that on large platforms, when you post something, the platform now owns the IP of that content. I am a fan, however, of when people are using information and platforms where they're in control and the sovereignty is caked into the mix. And that requires a philosophical decision right at the beginning. And unfortunately, most of the people in tech think that that's a combination of ideological BS or wishful thinking. And that's largely because they haven't been thinking about it for 30 or 40 years. And they will eventually be thinking about it when the ethical hammer of reality lands and the public realize that they've been duped into thinking that a platform was useful and quote unquote encrypted. Where the truth is, when you're walking your dog and you start to mention something about needing a new dog lead, and then you turn on Facebook and you see an advert for a dog lead, we're only starting to become aware of the fact that's a bit spooky. And that won't decrease, and that's why we need an alternative.
Yes, I think having a well thought out ethical structure is of tantamount importance. And Jonathan, you mentioned a bit earlier there that you're an experienced keynote speaker, and you've often spoken about the empowerment of thought and change. How should society be approaching these new technologies to sort of get the most out of them?
I think if I were to give a basic version of what was actually myriad concerns or myriad challenges to consider, the boiled down version, the distilled version is, as we look at new technologies, the question is, what is my role inside that ecosystem or that platform? Am I feeding more in than I'm getting out? Am I receiving more value than it costs me? And so this cost benefit analysis is very important. The consideration for the platforms, of course, and I'm including self, is that we may well have all the ideological backing and the ethical responsibility in place, but the hard thing is to make that extraordinarily simple for people to understand, especially when people have been extremely used to using tech platforms that are blatantly pillaging their information. So it's hard as an education piece. So I'm hoping that people will look at technology increasingly as, how sovereign am I in this mix? How much agency am I handing over? Where actually is my stuff? And how is it actually being used? But this is a hugely long game. And from looking into this as a child in 1979, 5, 6, 7 years old, through to dozens of startups, through to all the experience I've had, patent applications and raising boatloads of investment money across different countries, this is a very slow flywheel of change, because you can have a few people standing up on a hill with a flag saying, come over here, this is the best version of what's best for us. And the majority of people have a form of mass formation psychosis, which is, well, they'll do whatever they did yesterday or what everyone else does. And 70,000 thoughts per day that we think, 80% of those thoughts are the same as the day before. So we're in a holding pattern and arguably sleepwalking. And at worst, without being too catastrophic about it, we are strapped into a car that's hurtling towards a brick wall, and we're arguing about which seat to sit in.
Well, thanks so much, Jonathan. That's been a really, really fascinating conversation. Did you have a sort of key takeaway that you wanted to leave our audience with?
Yes. The key takeaway I'd say is when you've heard these type of conversations and you continue to hear brilliant podcasts like this discussing these things, question your own thinking as to what you genuinely stand for and what you find of value. And if you feel as if there is an alternative to technology, there's an alternative to the big tech owning your data and owning your digital identity, please get in touch. I'm easy to find online. And sure, if you want to try Self, go to self.app. It's free to have an experiment. But ultimately, this isn't a shill of stuff I'm doing. This is a small voice in a landscape of large multi-billion-dollar voices that say that humans don't have rights. And I think that we do. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to discuss it.
Thanks, Jonathan. I really have enjoyed listening to you talk about the concept of having sovereignty with your own personal data. And I think humans will naturally want to interact with platforms and projects that put that first. And perhaps the things that you've spoken about today are becoming more and more important with the advent of AI technology. So thank you so much. It's been such an interesting conversation.
Yes, thanks, Jonathan.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Tune in for the next episode of Intelligent Tech.